The Road to Recovery podcast, an SNJ Today presentation. Watch each week's TV program at snjtoday.com.
After nearly 8 years of drug addiction, Michael De Leon spent 12 years in prison and halfway houses for a gang-related homicide. Since his time in prison, he's dedicated his life to making the world a better place. He is the founder of Steered Straight, which guides young people away from the dangers of drugs and criminal activity. As a motivational speaker, he has spent thousands of hours talking to millions of young adults, and he has worked tirelessly to help people suffering find the road to recovery.
Welcome to the Road to Recovery. I'm Michael De Leon, and today I want to talk about how addiction, loss of a loved one, affects family members with someone who's not in recovery but is in recovery from the loss of her brother. So that's a part of recovery that we need to talk about and what she's doing with her life to make a difference in the lives of other people. Today I'm joined by Kelsey Casper. Thanks so much, Kelsey, for joining us today. And you're also a recovery coach.
Yes, I'm a recovery coach for Cumberland Cares, and then I'm also a recovery coach for Southwest Council. Awesome.
And so your life now is spent around solving this problem, fighting this problem, educating people. I guess kind of tell us where your motivation comes from. It comes from your brother, I guess.
Yeah, so December 21st, 2016, I lost my brother to an overdose, Kelsey Casper. And from that point forward, I wanted to break the silence and help break the stigma of addiction, because I feel like a lot of times people picture something that's not true of what an addict looks like. Like when I go into schools and I speak to our students about addiction, if I ask them what they think someone who's suffering with addiction looks like, they come back with these craziest things, like they're dirty, or they're homeless, or they're not loved, or whatever it may be, and it's this huge stigma. So I wanted to tell my brother's story and who he was and how loved he was and all of his accomplishments. And
where did Cody's use start? He died, how old was he when he passed?
My brother was 1 month into his 30th year. So he grew up in Cumberland County. He went to Cumberland Regional High School and also Delsea Regional High School. He went to University of Southern Mississippi on a scholarship for a kicker. He was an athlete, an honor roll student. When he passed away, he was an underwater diver, and he welded underwater in Philadelphia. So he had so many of these accomplishments, and I feel like people forget that when they think of someone that's struggling with addiction. So I try and focus on all of those things so people can realize that it can happen to anyone, and it's not just the stigma that people might think it is. It affects everyone.
And it's affecting you as a sister who's lost her brother and your family.
Yes, it affects my everyday life. My brother is still in my life every day. So when I got faced with the tragedy, I wanted to think of different ways that I could help our community and help prevention, but also people that are currently struggling, because we're so worried about stopping people from doing it, but what about the people that are already doing it and feel helpless?
How do we get them to recovery?
Yeah.
So it's kind of both ends of the spectrum. That's kind of how I look at it too. You know, if we don't stop the floodgate of new people coming into drug addiction, we're never going to stop this problem. But if we don't give people long-term recovery support services, in the last, as of this taping, in the last 9 days, I know 8 people who lost their life to addiction, and 6 of those people were in recovery for more than 6 months. You know, one person was almost 8 years and just picked up. So, you know, we have to help people understand to build that life of recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my brother was close to 1 year clean when he relapsed. And I think that a part of it is people don't fully learn how to cope with stresses. They're used to, when they were struggling with addiction, when they were feeling stress, they would go to that drug. So I feel like a lot of it is they're not learning healthy coping mechanisms in their recovery. So when something terrible happens, they don't know how to deal with it. For my brother, he was laid off, And also, unfortunately, we had lost my grandmom 3 weeks before he died. So it was just so much stresses that he didn't know how to deal with it. So I think that we also need to learn how to teach people how to cope with stressful and sad situations so they don't turn to their old habit.
So coping skills and spiritual principles, you know what I mean? Like connection. But your brother had a lot of connection, right? He's loved.
He was well loved. He was always in and a part of our life. It didn't matter whether he was in active addiction or in sobriety. It was always something he knew that he was loved and he could lean on us. So it wasn't necessarily that he felt like separated from our family, because we always made sure he was a part of our family. It was more so he didn't know how to deal with bad stresses when they were happening to him. And some people, it could be the separation of spirituality or feeling alone or anything like that. Other people, they just feel all of these bad things piling on them and they feel buried and they don't know how to escape it except for the one way that they were used to.
Which is not the best way to deal with stressors, obviously.
No.
So we'll be back with Kelsey right after this. Back on the road to recovery with Kelsey Casper, talking about her brother C.O.D.E, and he lost his life, I'm so sorry, December of 2016. It's just over a year ago.
Yeah.
And so were you involved in recovery efforts, recovery coaching and stuff prior to him passing, or?
No, I was not actively involved in the recovery community prior to his loss. I was studying towards my CADC at Atlantic Cape County prior to losing him, but I had kind of put that on the back burner. When I lost him, I was just like, no, like,
this is what I'm gonna do.
I found a passion and I went after that passion because I want to save people and I want people to know that they're worth being saved.
You know, so, I mean, people who are watching, you ask yourself, I just asked social media this question yesterday: how does a person years in recovery, when things are going so well, so good, everything's great, your kids, trust, job, everything's going great, and then you just pick up and use. You're saying one of the things that we need to look at that we're not looking at enough is stressors. And so an addict that copes with stress by using, they go right back to that coping mechanism, and it's not a mechanism at all. It's how they look at it as a mechanism. So what do we need to tell people about that,
I just think that we have to learn more about the psychology behind it, why people are using and what's different about their brain, and teaching and putting effort in teaching them how to deal with things properly, whether it's, financial stresses or family stresses or things like that. And I think that there needs to be more resources for people to feel safe and be able to reach out and talk to someone. Right now, with the stigma that's surrounded about drug addiction, if someone, even if they're 10 years in recovery, feels so many things piling on top of them, they might not feel safe reaching out to someone saying, listen, I'm 10 years in recovery, but I'm feeling really stressed right now, and I'm afraid I might relapse. I need someone to talk to. They might feel judged or something along those lines and fearful of reaching out to get help. So I think that a huge thing is education on coping mechanisms to people in recovery, but also education on drug addiction to the general community.
And how do we do that?
The general education to the community. I mean, I've personally done it through Project C.O.D.E, where I go to schools and I share over 90 stories that I've collected of our community about addiction that has affected all different branches of families. And I think that it helps open people's eyes to realize that it happens to everyone, that it doesn't matter what demographic you're from, what wealth bracket you're from, anything. It can happen to you, it can happen to your cousin, it can happen to your neighbor, it can happen to anyone.
Right.
And as soon as we get people to kind of realize that it can happen to anyone, I think that the stigma will slowly dissipate. I wish it would be quicker than slowly, but
Right, educating the public and parents, and then we teaching those coping mechanisms to people who are in recovery, so they understand that that's not an option, going back and using. It won't help them with their stress.
Yes, exactly.
And so recovery support services is part of that as well. You're doing that as a recovery coach.
Yes, so as a recovery coach right now, my main mission is to just link someone who's suffering to any resources that they might need. So if they are someone that's homeless or cold or anything along those lines, then I think my duty to them is to help link them with the proper resource to get that help. And eventually, our theory is eventually if we knock down all of the blocks that they say are in their way and the reason they're using, eventually we're going to get to the core problem. And they're going to realize that the problem is their drug use. And we get to be able to help them.
It's an important mission that you're on. And I think we need to talk more about it and educate more of the public about what's taking place. Back on the road to recovery right after this. Back on the road to recovery, I'm here with Kelsey Casper talking about, coping skills and coping mechanisms. And you're talking to kids. That's really the population more than anything that we need to, because if you could develop those coping skills and mechanisms as an early, student, middle school, high school, probably high school is too late actually, middle school student, then maybe that would prevent drug use in the first place, right?
Yeah, I've actually was very pleasantly surprised when I started going to schools. When I first started going, I was so nervous. I was afraid that the kids would kind of see me as a joke and they wouldn't take the story seriously and they would still leave the class thinking, she says it can happen to anyone, but it's not going to happen to me. But I've been very successful in going to schools and showing the stories. And I make sure I talk to smaller groups of kids. So I don't speak to auditoriums, I speak to classrooms. And so it's more of that one-on-one experience. And I'm not talking at them, we're just having a general conversation about addiction and the stories of addiction that have happened in our community. And so I have the kids read through the packets and of all the stories. And then I ask them to talk to me about what were like the strongest stories that stuck out to them and made the biggest impact on them. And by doing that, we just kind of have a bond and they start to trust me. And then they also are like, well, did this person go to Cumberland Regional, or did this person go to Delsey, or did this person go to Shalleck, or where was this person from? When did they graduate? Are they okay? Are they in recovery? Did they pass away? And so now everyone has a face and they're a real person that's struggling. And after the class, I've had people come up to me and we link them with like the drug counselors at Cumberland Regional or Delsey, and sometimes we find them help, and other times, maybe they know a loved one that's struggling and we help them cope with dealing with their loved one that's struggling, because as a teenager, it's hard to go through and watch someone that you love struggling with addiction too.
Right, and these kids are all dealing with it in their family. Maybe not all, but in some way, shape, and form, addiction is touching every single one of them.
Yes.
And this is a worldwide, but definitely every state in America is dealing with this.
Yeah. So in my survey, I had. Although I collected 90 some stories, I had over 200 people take my survey. And out of those 200 people, 90% of them said that they had lost someone they loved to an overdose. So it was crazy to me how many people have been losing, like that know someone and love someone that's suffering with addiction and have lost them. And it's scary. So,
and how about not even an overdose, but suffering from medical complications as a result of drug use?
Absolutely.
It's even more. It's affecting everyone. So those kids develop the coping skills, asking for help. What do you tell parents to really kind of talk to their kids and tell their kids?
I mainly focus on the children, so I don't normally speak with a lot of adults. I'm more so right now in the prevention with the children directly. Right. If someone were to come talk to me, I would just let them know that they need to have an open communication with their children and make sure their children have a trust with them. So that way, if one of their children's friends is using or something like that, the child feels safe coming to them and telling them about the problem, and they don't feel like they have to hide it. And if you have that open communication, there's less curiosity because they know what's going to happen.
Yeah, a lot of people watching now that need that advice. So be open with your children and let them know to come to you to talk about this issue. It's not something to be ashamed of. it's something that we have to address.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if we take away the curiosity and we kind of focus on the fact that people are struggling and what happens after you try once, that your brain changes and there becomes a chemical imbalance and people become addicted, and okay, you might not die the first time, but it changes your life and it destroys your soul when you're using. And eventually, unfortunately, many people lose their lives to the battle of addiction. So if we're more upfront about it and about the process of addiction and trying drugs, then I feel like it kind of creates more of a fear in children. And not that we want to scare them,
Right.
but we do want them to be cautious and not to experiment.
Well, like you said earlier, it's scary. I mean, we're losing so many people. How many people do you know you've lost besides your brother?
Besides my brother, I probably have lost 9 people at least that I know, and I have more people that are currently in recovery.
And you're how old?
I'm 25.
So you graduated high school like 8 years ago.
Yes.
And in your graduating class, do you know how many you've
In
lost?
my graduating class, I believe there's 4 of them that have died from drug-related. So whether it was an overdose or a car accident from drugs or things along those lines.
It's crazy. And it seems to be getting worse.
Absolutely. Every day someone knows somebody that has passed away. Do you know what I mean? I have friends who have boyfriends that have died from it. I have friends who also have other siblings that have passed away from it. So unfortunately, I have to welcome people to my club. I don't want to welcome anyone to my club of sibling grief, but unfortunately there's more and more people joining me.
So sibling loss is something that we're not talking about enough, and so that's one of your missions, really. So how about the people who are in recovery that you see as a recovery coach, talking to them? Do you see them do you go to the hospital on an overdose call sometimes?
Yes, so sometimes I do go to the hospital on an overdose call, and I'm just kind of there to speak to them about their different options. Sometimes we speak to the families too about their options and what they're going through. But our main goal is just the person that's in the bed and what they feel they need help with. So if they don't feel they need help with the overdose immediately or with their dependency immediately, then our goal is to help them with what they feel they need help with.
Right.
And eventually they realize that they do need help in recovery, and we help guide them, and we're a standing stone for them because not always do they have a support system. So sometimes we have to double as a support system for them and be their cheerleader.
Well, as a recovery coach, Kelsey's changing lives, and we'll be back to talk about that right after this. Back on the road to recovery with Kelsey Casper, recovery coach, and when you're talking about people who overdose and end up in the hospital, the ones that are in the bed, I mean, obviously, if it was a heart or a diabetes or something else, we probably wouldn't come to the patient and let them self-diagnose and decide what they're going to do. But in addiction, that's kind of what we're doing, right? It's up to them. They don't have to be forced to treatment. Some of them don't think they need it. What percentage do you think of the people who've overdosed in the hospital you think are willing to face it and get help at that moment?
So far, we're in the very beginning stages of recovery coaching, but we've actually had high success rate in getting people into recovery at the first meet with them. So I would say probably actually 70% of the people have started going to get help based on my other colleagues and things like that and speaking with them.
And is it easy to get someone into treatment?
No, unfortunately, it's very difficult to, it takes a team effort where whether the person was on call the night before, we're all helping to get their patient into recovery or a detox. There's not a lot of options, and unfortunately people that are in recovery most of the time don't have great insurance or don't have insurance at all. So unfortunately right now there's not a lot of options for people without insurance. So although everyone, even if 100% of the people wanted to go to a place for help, not 100% of the people could we maybe locate. So far we have located and placed everyone in a detox or a recovery center, but we need more resources and more grants and to be able to help everyone.
Help people get into treatment that at that time it's probably more critical than any other time. I mean, they've overdosed, they're very susceptible to going out and using again, right? They're in full withdrawal.
Yes, I mean, most of the time they want to do anything to help withdrawal stop. It's a terrible feeling. To witness someone going through withdrawal is a very scary thing, and it definitely needs medical attention.
Sure.
So our hope is that they don't want to go through that withdrawal ever again. And so since they don't want to go through that withdrawal ever again, we can help get them in a detox or a rehab facility. And like I said, so far we've been really successful with it, and hopefully, we will continue to be successful with placing them. But it does take like 2 or 3 hours for us to find a place with 14 of us calling.
Wow, and sometimes even longer than that.
Yeah, because it's full, even if there's not enough facilities, unfortunately, for everyone that's suffering. So sometimes beds are full.
Do you see it getting better anytime soon, or do you think it's going to get worse?
I hope that it gets better. The optimistic of me wants to say that it's going to get better because we're putting all of our efforts in to recovery and prevention. And so hopefully that our message gets spread across the world and it starts to get attention and more people start to be educated and we help stop the opioid crisis.
Well, that's the goal. And I think stimulants are right behind it. I think we're in the middle of a stimulant epidemic and no one's talking about it. Cocaine and methamphetamine confiscations have increased, and obviously, Narcan won't reverse a heart attack from a cocaine or a methamphetamine overdose, or heart attack. So it's just problem connection and coping skills. So thank you for what you do, Kelsey.
Thank you.
And like you said, C.O.D.E lives in your life every day.
Yes.
And you're going to make a difference in the lives of other people as a recovery coach and then prevention specialist with these kids. On the road to recovery, I'm Michael DeLeon. We'll see you on the next episode.